Hey friends, my name is Nate Nims. Thank you for joining us on this Spiritual Practice Thursday as we continue to look at and learn from the Enneagram. On these Thursdays, we are currently in a series learning from the Enneagram, and the Enneagram is a dynamic personality typology that recognizes the ways that we move and shift in stress and security. It tells us how to be mindful and thoughtful as we notice different patterns of behaviors and routines within us, and it helps us to be thoughtful and mindful of who we truly are and who God is calling us to be so that we can live as a people of grace and peace. A few weeks ago, we did an overview of the Enneagram, looking at all of the 9 personality types within it, and right now we are wrapping up a series on the gut triad. There are different sets of 3s, and in the Enneagram, your core personality, one way or another, likely comes down to this. When life happens, do you feel, think, or do? We have been spending the last 3 sessions now looking at the folks that when life happens, their first response is in that do spot. They feel from the gut. They think from the gut. They act from the gut. When life happens, their initial thought is to respond. Their initial orientation to life is that response. So we've looked at 8s and we've looked at 9s, and today we are going to look at 1s. Now, 1s on the Enneagram are often called the perfectionist, or something like the idealist, or something that points out the high standards that 1s live with. Now, you might be a 1 if you have any of the following characteristics, but as I read through this list, remember that with the Enneagram, the personality is less about outward behavior, though it's representative of who you are, and it's more about sort of the core motivation that is driving this behavior. What is it within you that is motivating you to live and act and move in the world this way? So, here are some things that you might be a 1 if you feel. You might be a 1 if people have told you you can be very critical and judgmental, but when they say that to you, you think to yourself, you should hear everything that I don't say out loud. You might be a 1 if you beat yourself up for your mistakes. You might be a 1 if you have a very difficult time relaxing and slowing down and taking a break because you know that there is more that needs to be done. You might be a 1 if you have a very difficult time in social situations when people break the rules. And maybe this is a rule like at the grocery store. If there's a line that says check out 10 items or less and you count the items in someone's cart and they have 11, you know they're a rule breaker and that gets under your skin. So it could be a very tangible rule like that, or it could be you see that same person that cheated the system to check out faster out in the parking lot and they don't take their cart back to the carousel so it can be returned. And that just makes you boil because you know that these behaviors are right and good and are ideal as a society, and yet you see them broken. All of this is important for 1s because details are very important to 1s. They are detail-oriented persons, and 1s often find themselves comparing themselves to others. They want to know if the standards that they hold themselves to are the standards that others are being held to, and they want to live into that ethical and moral and social ideal. Now, because 1s have so much of a drive to make things right, to be perfect, 1s can often struggle with resentment. 1s think that it is their responsibility to leave the world a better place than they found it. It's like that Boy Scout rule about camping. Wherever you camp, leave that area better than it was when you got there. Ones think that things are often right or wrong. They don't have a lot of space in between. Forgiveness can be difficult for ones, and ones will notice things that are out of place almost immediately. A one once shared a story about when they came home from work, and their spouse was home from work before them and had started working on dinner. And this family, their kids were home from school and they were working on homework while the spouse was starting dinner. But when the one came home, what they noticed in the living room was that a throw pillow was no longer resting on the couch, it was on the floor. And so their first response and feeling and action as they entered this almost idyllic setting at home was, who made a mess in the living room? Right? Like, ones will notice things that are out of place and they are motivated to make things right. Ones will do their best to make things right. They want to strive and achieve everything that they say they will be a part of. And they feel like they try really, really hard. And they wish and they hope that others would try just as hard as they do. Now, each week we have been sharing a cat meme to sort of speak to the personality types that we are looking at today. And today's cat is this one. The glass says, being morally and ethically superior in all situations, striving towards an unrealistic perfect standard for themselves. And that one cat is just reaching out, longing for that perfection. They want to cling to that. They want to have that. They want to find themselves there. Oftentimes, different folks, when they talk about the Enneagram, they'll talk about our childhood experience and the things that made us feel worthy or safe or loved or protected or wholesome, the behaviors and the patterns of life that we just sort of picked up on what made us feel special or what made us feel safe or what made us feel welcomed or cared for, protected, all that sort of stuff that makes us warm and fuzzy as a child. And sometimes it is said of the one typology that ones realized they were cared for or they felt that protection and love and grace from others when they noticed those details and held things together just right, when they were praised for doing something just like they were asked. Or it could be on the other side, where ones growing up got the message that unless they achieved exactly what they were supposed to, it was wrong. Or if they did something right but were then told, no, it doesn't count. Like, imagine a 4-year-old mowing your lawn. Would you go out and tell them after the job was done you missed a spot? Sometimes ones feel like they've always missed that spot. And so the ones are striving to make things perfect, to make things right, to live up to their ideal. That's the motivation that drives them, and that's the energy that makes them respond to life right away. So when a one is healthy, when they are really secure in themselves, when they are trusting their life to grace and peace and trusting others to that as well, they're going to be a person of integrity and service because they're going to want to help others. Ones want to make things right. Ones want to live up to the highest standards of our social contract with one another. Ones are also balancing, when they are healthy, the responsibility that they have for themselves and the reality that neither others nor themselves will be completely perfect. They learn how to balance that space where the pillow can be on the floor in the living room and it's not the end of the world. They've got to live with this patience that the process towards perfection is slow, and yet the moral arc of the universe still bends towards justice and we will get there. It's this ongoing work that healthy ones, really secure ones, can live into when they can see themselves in this process and trust that it'll be okay and it doesn't all have to be done in an instant. When a 1 is in an average space, when they're not particularly secure, when they're not particularly stressful, a 1 can default to having a very judgmental or comparative mind. And I don't mean judgmental in a very negative sense, though to other personalities in the Enneagram, 1s often come across as very judgmental. They can come across as very critical. But as we said before, 1s often have in their head a voice that points out things that are out of place, that are wrong, that are not right, that should be done better. And 1s can feel like they have to make these things right. They really struggle to accept that imperfection is an inevitable reality of our life together. So 1s are striving and they're working towards this, but they naturally will spot those errors and imperfections, and it can be hard for someone in that 1 space to see something that's out of place and accept it. An average 1 might be the kind of person that somebody else does the dishes, but then the 1 notices that there's a little soap residue on the dishes, so they do them all over again. If a 1 is unhealthy, they will become fixated on everything that they see in imperfection. They will become absorbed with micromanaging, and they will assert control over something or someone because that is relief for them. When 1s are in this unhealthy space, the world feels out of control. The world feels like it is chaotic, and they have to have some control to make things right. If a 1 is unhealthy, if a 1 is completely stressed and just overwhelmed, they have to have something or someone that they can control to find relief, so that they know even if everything else is crazy, this one thing is just right. What one person said about being a 1 is that I am very dependable and punctual. They went on to say, I have very high and strong ethics and standards, and I'm great with details. And who doesn't love a friend or family member that is dependable and punctual? Who among us doesn't want to have high and strong ethics and standards and is good with details, right? These are great things about 1s. But someone else said, this is what I don't like being about a 1. They said, I don't like that I see what is wrong or needs to be fixed as soon as I enter a room and situation. Not only do I notice it, but I have a strong desire to name all that needs fixing and to fix it before allowing myself to recognize what is good or blessed or is beautiful. They went on to say, who wants to be around someone that is always quick to point out what is wrong? I feel like I am a naturally optimistic and fun-loving person. And that's the struggle for a 1. A lot of times they can be very optimistic persons. They have this ideal. They know what perfection is. They are living their life in a very particular direction and striving to achieve it. They've got a lot of purpose that they're reaching for, and they can be great and fun-loving folks. But as this individual said, they naturally notice things that are out of place, that are not quite right, and their initial motivation in the moment as life happens is to name it and to fix it. And that is their primary response. Instead of noticing what is good or beautiful or worthy of praise, They see what's wrong, and it consumes them. And that's the struggle that they wrestle with. Another person said that I wish people would know that I take criticism, even constructive criticism, as confirmation of the voice that is in my head is correct, and that I am not really good enough. I also wish they knew that my intention is not to hurt people when I suggest ways they could improve. What other personality types, what other folks need to remember about ones is that when they seem critical of us, the voice in their head is even more critical of themselves. And so one of the things that I really love about the Enneagram is that it is a reminder that other people see the world in different ways, that we respond and think and act differently as life happens. And if we don't remember that, when we say or do things to others, we can exacerbate the situations instead of helping them. So one thing that I have to remember when I deal with ones is that criticism needs to be couched very carefully. It cannot be said in a way that demeans the perfection that they are striving for, because if we do something to confirm the voice that's in their head that is constantly telling them what is out of place, what is not quite right, then they can beat themselves up even more. We need to find ways to encourage one another, and ones need to find ways to speak back to that voice in their head if they're going to live with grace and peace. So here's some questions to consider to see if you or someone that you love is an Enneagram 1. Does it bother you when people try to bend the rules to their own advantage, when they act as if the rules don't apply to them, or if the rules are somehow different for everyone else? Another question to consider. Do you give almost 100% of yourself to a task and expect others to do the same? And if they don't, are you likely to come along after the fact and correct what they worked on and make sure it is held to your standard? You might be a 1 if you are a judgmental person, but your inner critic attacks your own efforts most of all. Are you more likely than others that you know to notice mistakes or things that are out of place? Think about it like this. If you were out at a restaurant with a friend in the BC before COVID era, could you notice a typo in that menu when your friends were looking for something to eat? You could be a 1 if you really struggle with forgiveness. If resentment is something that is often eating away inside of you. That can be very difficult for ones. Now, throughout the Enneagram, we have talked about the ways that personalities shift, and that's what makes this personality typology unique among others, because we recognize that our personality in times of health, in times of security, in times of just being average, we move. And so in stress, the personality of the 1 goes to an unhealthy 4. And 4s are a part of the next triad that we will get to. But you see in this chart that the arrow from 1 is pointing away and going towards 4. When a 1 is stressful, their inner critic is at work overtime. It is just going and going and going, and it is reminding them of everything that is out of place and not right. When a 1 is in this space, because they're noticing everything that isn't meeting their standard, they can't relax because there's so much that they have to correct. And if they see others relaxing, having fun, being restful, they can get resentful of that. They don't like to see others having fun because there's so much work to do. So how could that lazy slob take a break? If a 1 is in this stress spot, they're going to be very sensitive to criticism. They might be dealing with even more depression or anxiety because that inner voice that is critical is just in overtime. So in this space, they want to be free of obligations, of responsibilities, but they can't let it go. And because they can't make everything right, they start to lose confidence in themselves and they can feel unlovable. Insecurity, though, when a 1 is healthy, when they are confident in themselves, when they are living in a space where they can flourish, as you can see, the arrow pointing to 1 comes from 7. In this space, they are more self-accepting and they can relax. They can be fun-loving. They can take a break. And instead of being both either or thinkers, 1s will become more of a both and individual. They can recognize that their perfection might not be the perfection of others. And this doesn't necessarily fall into a space of moral relativism, but it is the space of, if my favorite color is yellow, I don't have to say it's imperfect for you to think your favorite color is red. Right? They can recognize the shades and the nuances of how life happens, and maybe they can give grace to others. So if they see someone at the grocery store in the 10 item or less line and they have 15 items in their cart, they can instead of criticizing and resenting and being angry at that person, they can tell themselves a story in their head like, maybe they've got to get home quickly because their kid just came home from school and they don't want their child to be alone. Right? Like in that healthy space, they can be generous towards others. They can start to extend this freedom to others, and they can shift their attention to everything that they naturally recognize that is wrong or out of place. And in health, 1s will start to notice more and more what is in place and what is right and what is good. They can appreciate those things primarily and then work on correcting everything that isn't right. Now, also in the Enneagram, there are these wings that the numbers have. So you've got this whole sort of spectrum of shades for personalities. And you might lean one way or you might lean another. That's just how we all are. We're wired differently. So wings for a 1 on the Enneagram works like this. A 1 with a 2 wing, and we'll get to 2s next week, but a 1 with a 2 wing is going to be a bit more extroverted. They're going to be warm, helpful, empathetic, but sometimes they can come off as more critical and controlling. In the Enneagram, the 2 is the helper. And as we'll see next week, folks that are helpers, they want to help, right? It is in the name, and helping is good, but sometimes that help can be a means of control or pride, because every now and then in that 1 wing 2 space or with 2s, the help comes because the individual giving the help thinks the individual receiving the help could not survive without them. A 1 with a 2 wing is going to be a really good problem solver. They're going to be generous. Every now and then they can try to accomplish too much in a day, though. There's just so much that they want to achieve. There are so many wrongs that they want to make right. There are so many things that are out of place that if it was just a little different, they could get it fixed. A 1 with a 9 wing, though, is going to tend to be a little more introverted, a little more prone to being able to relax and slow down the way that they notice everything out of place. They're going to be a bit more objective in thinking, and with the 9 energy, as we saw last week, 9s as the peacemakers, they can be slow to offer their opinions or suggestions. So a 1 with a 9 wing is going to notice things that are wrong. They'll notice things that others might not have got quite right, but they might not speak as quickly as a 1 with a 2 wing. They're going to be more outwardly calm, but inwardly they'll be like a duck on top of water. Like their feet are always kicking. So they'll mull over decisions for a long time. Now, each of the Enneagram types has a deadly sin that they suffer with, something that keeps them separated from others and from God, from living into the fullness of the life that we need to have. The deadly sin for ones is anger. Ones, because they're striving to be perfect, they can be chronically resentful of others and themselves. They have this ideal, they have this perfection, and too often it is more than they or anyone else can live up to, and so they are angry about that. That anger is often under the surface because things need to be made right. Things could be better. We have this ideal, so why don't we live it out? How dare they don't do what is right? How dare I don't get this exactly as I know it could be? Anger is often just under the surface for ones, and it can come across usually as resentment that can make forgiveness and reconciliation very difficult. So the virtue that ones need to cultivate, the thing that they need to remind themselves and strive for, is patience. Ones need to learn to be patient, to accept that there are multiple ways of doing something, that there are more than one way to build an IKEA bookcase. I don't know, right? Like, if a 1 is working on a project, they need to recognize that if someone else is doing a project as well, a 1 doesn't need to take a break from theirs to supervise another. They need to have more patience in the world with themselves and with others. They need to appreciate that their work, their calling, their purpose is worthy, right? Like, perfection is a worthy cause. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, "Be perfect as God is perfect." But the perfection talked about in that passage is love. And this love can be patient, right? That's what Paul writes in Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Patience is what ones need to cultivate for themselves first. And it's going to be hard, but it's necessary to remind ones to be patient for themselves so that they can be patient with others. Now, each week we have been looking at a practice called SNAP. And SNAP stands for Stop, Notice, Ask, and Pivot. This is the spiritual practice that fits into the Enneagram. It's the mindfulness that lets us reflect on our lives and find our place together with God and grace and one another. So SNAP starts with stopping, and for ones, stopping can be hard. Ones are doers. Ones are folks that notice things that are wrong and need to make things right. So ones have to really practice stopping. And with the patience that ones need, they have to remember that practices like this, which is essentially a form of contemplative prayer or meditation, when you are contemplating, when you are meditating, when you are praying, you don't worry about if your prayer is right or wrong, good or bad, because it is right and it is good that you do it. So if you are a 1 and you are able to do this at all, well done, you got it perfect. Don't worry about the amount of time that you are spending on it. Don't worry about doing it in the exact right order, because however you do it, to be mindful and to be thoughtful in a way that connects you with yourself and with God, that is worthy and that is perfect. So ones need to stop, and then they need to notice. They need to notice what's going on internally and externally. And likely, they will be noticing or reflecting on things that are out of place, things that are not quite right, but simply observe yourself in this moment. Recognize that what is out of place, what's not quite right, it is a part of your experience in life, but it is only part of your experience in life. It's not the totality of your existence. So as ones stop and notice what is going on around them and within them, they need to remind themselves to notice what is good, what is right, what is beautiful, what is worthy of praise and appreciation. And then ones can ask themselves any number of the following questions. They could ask themselves, what do I believe right now? And perhaps in this moment, a one believes that they are obligated to correct the mistakes of others. Perhaps what a one believes is that it is unacceptable to make any mistake, no matter how close it is to perfection. Perhaps a one believes that the inner voice, the inner critic that they struggle with, has the voice and authority of God. And how do those beliefs make a one feel? Well, it could make them feel angry or resentful. It could make them worried that they will be blamed or criticized. It could make them feel like they are Sisyphus, always trying to roll that boulder up the hill, but knowing that they can never get there. So they just start to feel more and more disenfranchised. But then ones really have to ask themselves, is this true? If you are a one, are you alone responsible for making this world a good and perfect and better place? Are you responsible for the perfection of this life? Are things always right and wrong, good and bad, or is there a space in between? Does that voice in your head, does that inner critic that reminds you and points out to you things that are wrong, does that voice have final authority? And then how could your life be different if you let go of some of those thoughts or beliefs in this moment? Would you be able to hold space for both and? Would you be able to have that inner critic and say back to them, thank you for protecting me. Thank you for guiding me towards what is good, what is worthy, but I'm going to focus on what is already good and what is already worthy right now. If you could stop some of those beliefs and feelings that make you so overwhelmed, could you take a breath and relax by focusing on what is already good and worthy and beautiful? And that's the pivot. That is the P in SNAP for ones. Perhaps if you are a one, you need to pray the serenity prayer, especially the first line. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Knowing that difference, living into that prayer can be life-changing for a one. Ones also need to remind themselves that everyone is inherently worthy. We are all made in the image of God. We are all beloved children that deserve and are inherently given grace and peace. So there is a goodness in us first. Yes, things can be wrong, things can be messy, but there is a goodness there. And that goodness is not diminished when we make mistakes. It might get muddied a little bit. We might have to do things to make things right. We have to find ways to make amends. But that goodness is there, and mistakes will come and go, and we'll take care of them as we have to. Ones need to remind themselves how much they can appreciate their inner critic. And that is a pivot that can be difficult because that voice can say a lot of damaging and hurtful things to itself. But that voice has been developed and is a part of your personality if you're a one to make you the person of purpose and striving that you are. So say back to that inner voice, thank you for pointing that out to me. Thank you for helping me to see things another way. But then say to your voice, but perfection can look like this, or it can look like that, or it could look like that. And a pivot for a one, something that will be difficult but possibly helpful. It's quarantine, right? It's COVID season. So what would it be like if tomorrow, and you're a one, you wake up and you don't make the bed? What would it be like tonight if you don't do the dishes and you just leave them in the sink? Can you, as a one, intentionally make a little mistake to see that if you live through it, you can actually live through it and it will be okay? In the book, The Road Back to You, they give a number of messages that different personalities need to heal. And the healing message that ones need comes from Brene Brown. Brene Brown writes, "You are imperfect and you are wired for the struggle and you are worthy of love and belonging." We are worthy of love and belonging even in the imperfections. You are wired for this struggle, and we need your work in this struggle as well. So here's some more spiritual transformation in the one space. Try journaling. Journal in response, though, to your inner critic. Take what those voices in your head say to you, write them down, and then try responding to them with grace. Try responding to them with patience and understanding. Spiritual transformation for a one can also come from resisting the urge to give other people tasks to do. It can also come from not redoing the work that others have done. It can come from appreciating what others are doing, and instead of first saying to someone else, "That's not quite right," practice saying to them, "Thank you for doing this." Practice telling them exactly what you notice they did get right, and appreciate that, cherish that. Ones are the kind of folks that need a hobby that is fun simply for being fun. Something that they don't have to be perfect at, that they can learn, that they can develop, but they need something in their life that is just good for the sake of being good and relaxing. And the biggest journey for ones will come with that struggle with resentment and anger and patience. Ones need to find that patience and that forgiveness for others and for themselves. Because anger is just below the surface, because they keep noticing what is out of place, what's not quite right. Ones need to remind themselves everything doesn't have to be right in this moment, but so many other things are right, and we can fix this in the long run. We've got to run this marathon together. It's not a race against each other, it's a marathon with one another. So ones have to be folks that intentionally and continually practice that patience and understanding so they can try to let go of the resentment that too easily will eat away at them if they are not thoughtful and mindful and contemplative. That is an overview of the Enneagram 1. A lot of this material that we've been doing has come out of The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. If you really want to just dig in and binge on the Enneagram, you can do that with their book, The Road Back to You. Another great book, but a lot more dense and academic, is The Enneagram by Richard Rohr, and there are a whole host of resources in the description at the Enneagram Institute type descriptions. There's a link there if you're interested in learning more. So thanks for joining us today as we've wrapped up the gut triad. Next week, we'll be looking at Enneagrams 2s and the feeling triad. Folks that, as life happens, their first response is to feel. So we'll start looking at 2s, 3s, and 4s. But thank you for joining us today. Hope we'll see you on Sunday. And until then, grace and peace, everybody.